Good evening, everyone, and welcome to day 62. And before we get started, today's t-shirt's actually a little sad. It is one of the first has-been shirts that I got. And while it does have a very clear picture of Alistair kicking up his feet, the picture of Lucifer is kind of fading away, and I won't even tell you what's left of Vox. But we'll find out more about Vox someday. But, yes, somehow we keep getting forward in this thing. We've done 61 days, and now we're doing a 62nd. At this point, I have reached the stage where the calendar and I may have entered into active negotiation. Okay, today, if you're following along in the coloring book, is a purple day. And the biggest thing that happens isn't technical realization. It was continuity. More specifically, it was the growing realization that parts of Brighter are no longer behaving like separate rehearsal sections. They really need to be one emotional structure. And one of the things I realized this morning was that stopping at the end of the first verse is simply wrong. It's all right. It's not technically wrong, but emotionally and musically, it just isn't right. The best way I can describe what stopping after the first verse sounds like or feels like, it's like cold turkey quitting emotion. You're already in a forward motion that needs to literally birth a chorus from it. It's almost that realization of what you're saying results in that chorus. So this morning, I completely changed my rehearsal system. So my typical rehearsal system is I'll do a section or I'll do a take and I'll do some analysis of it, and then I'll play it back and do some more analysis of it. But that tends to divorce me from the process. So what I did was I figured I would do a block of the first half of the verse. There's a split there. I would shift over to the second half of the verse, and I would do a block, but I would also go into the chorus block. I wasn't going to stop it. So my two sections of practice were first half of verse and second half of verse plus chorus. And the reason I call them blocks is that I would run 3 times through. And I stopped only to say, this take felt like that. I didn't even go for playback. I just wanted to sing it, know what I felt, and sing it again 3 times. That change just by itself altered the entire feel of how things ran this morning. I mean, almost immediately I stopped noticing isolated mistakes and started really getting into the larger behavioral patterns. Energy, obviously. The energy naturally wants to rise through the whole take. And that's not necessarily a bad thing typically, but if this problem is going to run for several minutes, that energy curve has to be sustainable. Otherwise, by the end of it, there was an old Bugs Bunny cartoon where Bugs is playing a conductor to an opera singer, and he just leaves the opera singer up there until he turns red, blue, green, his clothes fall apart. You cannot go that far. That upward run also kept revealing something a little interesting. And what it was when I was hitting the upward run, for example, if the thing goes la, I had a pause before I would go into the upper run. It was actually on playback, a noticeable break. And it slowly felt more and more like more technical limitation. No, less less technical limitation, and more like that mental preparatory, I'm about to jump into something high. Very similar to Boulevard when I was first approaching the chorus. It's like, oh God, here it comes. And the brain was basically sort of steadying itself to make the jump. And this all happens very quickly, but nonetheless, there's a division. And that in itself becomes a new problem to try to figure out. Let me jump ahead. Meanwhile, the 1B locked into the chorus work definitely revealed something else. They were like two different instincts I was having. On the one side, I was thinking, okay, just relax into it. And the other one was saying, well, it's intense. It needs to be more dramatic. And of course, music and in performance and in the universe, these things are not always friends. So one of the strongest realizations of the day came when I started backing away from trying to actively perform the emotion and instead started paying attention to what happened when the emotional state simply was there. In other words, don't act angry, be angry. Or don't act conniving, be conniving. There's a comment that many actors will often go into an audition and walk out saying, I blew it, I just acted through that whole thing. Because the concept of mentally going, I am acting, is not acting. It is much more subtle. Some of the quieter takes as a result of that, they sort of started to expose the chewy center where the drama actually was living. And it wasn't the loud parts, and it wasn't explosive parts. It was the interesting, sticky bits. That emotional shape underneath everything. That led to more realizations, and I wasn't really expecting this one. At one point, I stopped feeling like Vox was talking outwardly to somebody. Instead, it felt more like he was contemplating a justification. Of course, this is the way things are, because they have to be. So he's not explaining himself. He's not persuading someone, which he's perfectly fine at doing. He's justifying something to himself. And that shift kind of changed the entire phrasing of what I was doing. It became smoother. The continuity linked up more. And those pauses on the runs and even the pauses in the phrase sounded intentional rather than an interruption. In fact, one of the biggest questions that I had this morning became, what if pauses aren't actually supposed to break the feeling line? If the emotional line continues straight through the silence, and I think that the best example of that is watching somebody get challenged and then do nothing, but you can still feel the explosion is about to come out. Because one of the strongest things that I hit this morning in my different takes, it flowed together even through the pauses. And that has me increasingly wondering whether continuity carrying phrasing is as much about what happens between the words as what's happening during them. Now, this happens a lot in acting, but again, having so much thought and experience in acting, you don't know what you can go, oh, I could pick this up and use it in singing. Okay. You have to understand, when I go into these expositional tirades, I don't spend an entire session just sitting there with a pipe coming up with different philosophies. Sometimes things just blindside me. Sometimes things just work. Sometimes they just don't work. And there was one that actually blindsided me today. At some point, I apparently discovered that the Brooklyn in me that I don't have decided to show up. Now, I have absolutely no idea where that came from. I mean, sure, my father was from Brooklyn, but even he didn't have a Brooklyn accent. But it showed up. I had 2 words, and I don't want to give a word from the song. But, okay, let's take the word unbelievable, which unbelievable is pronounced one way, unbelievable. Just the sound of another accent layering into a word. And it was just weird. Okay, toward the end of the session, there was another realization. And I love coming up with the phrase, it might be the biggest of the day. I don't know. I can't gauge these things. There was one take where the voice suddenly locked into a place and a color that sounded controlled, stable, and different. It wasn't better necessarily. It was different. And the best way to describe how I interacted with this new voice takes me back to playing Dungeons and Dragons as a kid. So it felt like I had accidentally discovered a next level voice that was above my level. So I hadn't reached the level required to understand how to use it, but there I had it. In D&D, it's like finding a spell scroll for a spell you technically aren't high enough level to cast yet. Yes, I'm probably first edition, and many of you are going, what? But it's interesting. It's important. I can tell that this voice might have a purpose in helping direct through this piece, but I just don't know how or what it's supposed to do. And that take was just full of clues. I'm talking handy-dandy notebook clues. Yes, I'm not that old. Now, one other thing happened today, and it happened without having a Boulevard section at all. Almost exactly 1 month ago, I sent a demo clip to a vocal coach, not a vocal coach that I have a vocal coaching relationship with, but just someone that was willing to listen to me attempt to sing. And about 2 days ago, I sent an updated version. Boulevard from a month ago, Boulevard from this past week. The response was really encouraging. And before I even get into the response, my reaction was even better, because for those who followed me going through the decision process of putting a take out there, I was terrified of the response I was going to get. And here I'm a month later, and I'm like, I think this is good enough to send. And that, the response was encouraging. And it wasn't what was said. It was what wasn't said. There was no talk about problems in my stability, nothing about support, coordination. The response basically said there are so many differences. it sounds stronger and open. And the conversation pretty much shifted toward phrasing. Suggestion, think about how the lines would be spoken naturally and try to bring more of that into the melody. In Boulevard, I walk alone. And it's because this is I walk alone, that's not natural. So it's a question of how would that naturally sound if it were stretched out. So a little more strength to the onset of the word I instead of letting it back connect to something before it. Because you know, had something for dinner, I would. It doesn't link like that naturally, unless you're Yoda. But it was really amazing and fascinating because after spending an entire morning thinking about communication, continuity, phrasing, emotion, all of that stuff, the first outside feedback I get after a month is basically, okay, don't worry about that. Let's talk about communicating. And that actually is a pretty good sign that at least some of these changes that I've been beating my head on the desk over are actually becoming audible. I mean, I'm at the point now that I'm really too close to it. I only hear micro changes. My spouse, as an artist, was talking about the fact that as an artist working on something, you'll get so close to it that you won't see it anymore. And what they said was, hold it up in a mirror, because now it doesn't look like what it was looking like before, and you can step away from it. So let's see. Speaking about things becoming audible, if you're still here, the teaser for that new series is now live. It's short. It's supposed to be short, very short, but it explains just enough to tell you what 58 Investigations is. Yes, not are, is. There was an old advertisement many decades ago for the birds, and the poster read, "The birds is coming." Same thing. If you're curious about tomorrow's launch, the teaser went out earlier today. And as I say, tomorrow, the file's open. Anyway, that's going to be day 62. We'll all get together, hold hands, and do this again tomorrow. But until then, thank you, as always, for joining me on this journey. And, of course, later.